Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
All right, Perry Carpenter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for making time for me.
Of course. Well, let's tee this up. So today, any image, video, or audio can be fabricated to the extent that it's almost impossible to tell what's real and what's not. This show focuses on how we can combat AI deepfakes, deception, and disinformation. My guest, Perry Carpenter, Chief Human Risk Management Strategist at KnowBe4, has just written a book called FAIK, a practical guide to living in a world of deepfakes, disinformation, and AI-generated deceptions. Perry has been called Deceptionologist, which I want to hear more about. He's a cybersecurity
Right.
researcher who's been exploring the intersection of technology and humans for over 2 decades. So Perry, I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, a lot to go over. But first and foremost, what led you down this path, your career in this, and eventually the book?
Yeah, so I've kind of slipped into the human side of security. So started off as a programmer, ended up programming my way into security based on some of the projects that I had. So I ended up becoming part of a cybersecurity team. Got a big passion around that because it is very cause driven. But over years, what I realized is that as an industry, we spend, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars trying to keep people from doing bad things. And at the end of the day, the technology that we throw at it is inadequate. And somebody, despite all the firewalls and endpoint protection and fancy things that we do that have blinky lights, somebody with just the right story can pick up the phone and trick somebody in a call center into bypassing all of that. So I really wanted to focus, I guess it's been about the past 15-ish years, really just studying that. So why do we do the things that we do? Why do we think the things that we think? Why do we get tricked into doing things that we said we would never do, or taking actions that we said we would never take, believing things that we didn't never thought we would believe? And it lines up. I mean, you mentioned the word deceptionologist. Early, I mean, before even a career, back when I was in college and before I was this, nerdy kid that would walk around with 10 different packs of magic cards in my pockets and, doing coin tricks and everything else because I was really fascinated with misdirection and the assumptions that we put in our mind and how that assumption can just all of a sudden get blindsided by something that it didn't plan for because the magician or somebody else that's holding the secrets is coming at things from an entirely different frame. And I think that when it comes down to it, cybercrime and disinformation and all that is very similar in nature to why we fall for magic tricks.
That's a an amazing thought and concept. And I go back to like I don't know, maybe 12 years ago, I started doing talks about cybersecurity. And
Mhm.
in my initial conversations about it, it was why are people falling for phishing? Why are they falling for like spear phishing and all these different attacks? And I think fundamentally we want to see the good in people. We want to trust them
Mhm.
and believe them. But like at some point in time, when do we say, we got to stop doing that? Like, how do we change
Right.
that sort of mindset?
I think that, and what I keep coming back to is that we need a sense of skepticism, but it also needs to be like an optimistic skepticism because I think we can get really depressed or we can get really cynical, and that's not really helpful as part of the human condition. But at the same time, we need to realize that we've hit this crossover point, especially when it comes to deep fakes, where you can't really be sure what's real and what's not. I mean, the studies show that even when people are warned that they're about to see a deep fake within a next series of videos, they only will pick it out. I think the number was 21.6% of the time in the study
Wow.
from last year. And then they'll falsely identify real ones as fake about that same percentage of the time. So when you can no longer reliably tell which is which, then that means that we need to approach just the way that we perceive things differently. And some of that is that bit of skepticism. And by that, what I'm getting at is that whenever we get a piece of media in front of us or an email or an interaction, we need to not really be asking the question, is this real or is this fake? We need to be asking the question, why does this thing exist? Why did it land in front of me? What's it making me feel? What story is it trying to tell? What does it want me to do or want me to believe? And then you can start to unravel a lot of the other things related to that. And you might find that it's a good thing, or you might find that it's a deceptive thing.
That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that take before. It's almost like a cynicism of whatever comes in front of us. But if you take that out further, you can almost apply that to any article written by any known media,
Absolutely.
whether it be the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, whoever, or other
Yeah.
random organizations. And there's always an angle. If you start looking at all this stuff, there's
Hmm.
always an angle, no matter whoever wrote it.
Yeah.
I miss the days where things are just like, here are the facts. And this
Right.
is what happens. And instead, everything has sort of a spin to it and whatever. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So I guess we could almost apply that to every single type of media that's out there.
Yeah, I think we have to. I mean, when I was thinking about this, the book and then just the problem of deepfakes and disinformation and everything else, it all ended up coming back to things that we've talked about for a while now, things like basic media literacy, digital literacy, understanding how to do source checking and fact checking. But the weird thing is that we live in a world where even fact checking has become a bad word for some people, because some of the fact checking sites have bias and agendas. But when you start to pull back the covers on those, even there is an international fact-checking consortium that has a standard set that all the good ones will adhere to around transparency of, when anytime you do a retraction or change the story or quote a source, all those kind of things. So if you were to find like three or four and start to go through those and say, all right, what lines up between these? Yeah, it's a little bit of work, but at the same time, I don't know that any of us just wants to hand our brain over to whatever, the source of what any media, whether we trust it or not. We don't want to be just unconscious about the way that we go about life. And on the important things, I would think that we would want to spend the time to investigate and really understand if the version of truth that we're letting into our consciousness and subconsciousness lines up fairly reliably with the version of truth that we could ferret out if we spend a few minutes on it.
How do you think that we could solve for the problem where, and it could be anywhere, any election, anywhere in the world,
Hmm.
where maybe the day or 2 days before a video comes out that's a deep fake that quotes maybe, or maybe it is the actual, and it's not the actual person, but maybe it's the person that's
Right.
running for office, and they're saying something that's just, and there's not enough time for people truly to
Yeah.
be able to determine, and maybe that skews things. How do we sort of prevent that layering of
Yeah.
systems like that?
That's a question that we don't, I think, as a society have the answer to yet, right? Because even a couple of weeks ago, Gavin Newsom in California signed into law a couple bills on deepfakes. And one of them said if there is synthetic media, which is just the fancy academic word for deepfake, a non-organic piece of media that is out there that is deceptive in nature and it's spreading on social media platforms, if the social media platform hits a certain bar in revenue and has a certain number of people on the platform, then you have these sets of criteria that come into play. One of those is like a 72-hour takedown rule. You have to be able to identify that and take it down within 72 hours. That doesn't account for the situation that you just mentioned, which is 1 or 2 days before a critical election. It also, I think, in a very fateful way, does not account for the nature of narrative in general. 72 hours is a complete news cycle. People have bought into things within that amount of time. And even if a retraction comes, people don't care anymore. They've solidified their viewpoint. The other thing is, as we get more and more polarized, within 72 hours, you could have political violence. You could have people taking things in their own hands. So I think that it's a very naive thing to say 72 hours. Maybe on the technology side, that's reasonable to say it's going to take that long to investigate it and to do something. But when it comes to the nature of narrative, it's not enough time. Or I mean, it's too long. It's way too long.
No, I agree with you. So I bring this up because I've talked about it with other people recently, and that is a story that Sam Altman had mentioned, and that is in the coming, let's say, 6 months, maybe it's even 2 years at the most, one of the most powerful aspects of AI in general will be its convincing nature, right? So the idea that
Hmm.
it has this world of knowledge, plus, let's say you've given it access to anything you've written or videos or all
Yeah.
these things, and it is and you've heard this, I'm sure, on either ChatGPT or other platforms, the voice simulation is absolutely exquisite. We're at a point where
Yeah.
it's human-like, it's intonation, it's all these things combined. And if it has some angle that it wants to come in and calls you or interacts with you, and it sounds maybe even using a deepfake on that, but let's say it's just
Hmm.
convincing you of something. I mean, sales organizations to me are probably going to go away in the next few years once they start tapping into these things, because imagine how powerful that would be to have something that's fully responsive to every single thing that you as a human say, like to counter the
Yeah.
sales. It's automatically like, oh, no, let me tell you this. And then it goes down the road and it's
Exactly.
the best salesperson you'll ever see. So this is the
Hmm.
stuff that truly starts to upend and then actually become very scary, I think, for many people out there, depending on the angle that it comes at. How do
Yeah.
we, yeah,
I'll give you one interesting story that just lines up perfectly with what you were talking about. So in the about around end of July, early August every year, there are two conferences that happen in Las Vegas, both hacker conferences, Black Hat and DEF CON. And this year at DEF CON, I entered. It was like the first time that we were ever able to do this. We did it as a trial. I entered a large language system backed chatbot that was ported through a voice system, just like what you mentioned, into the social engineering competition. And it was basically that chatbot against the people that created what's called the social engineering village there. So it's a husband and wife team. They've been doing that for 20, 30 years, decades of experience. And in that first test, it was the first live fire test that I've ever done with and set that bot against unsuspecting people. It got every objective that I wanted it to get out of person on the first call. It captured more flags, objectives than the human team did. In that first call, it kept somebody on the phone for 10 minutes. It joked with them, made them laugh a little bit. It sounded, unsure of itself, did not have the affects of a bot. It had the affects of a human, the convincing nature of a human, the affects and the amicability of a human trying to work through something. In fact, on the work through something, it actually helped them solve a minor problem with their computer,
oh my goodness.
and fended off an interesting question or two. So, and that was just one of the bots, and we tested five, and they were all fairly similar in that. Now, I will say the human team, and this may be encouraging, technically won, even though we won more objectives because there's point values. Each objective
Ah,
has a point value, and the human team had a really clever story that let them go after all the high value things first, versus my more cautious approach which was to start off low and build up high. But if I had just changed this bot's story to theirs, it would have, I think, wiped the floor with everything. And when there's, 500 people in the room that were watching that, everybody's mouth was on the floor. It was totally
stunning.
shocking. And that was months ago. That's not,
Yeah.
GPT 4.0 advanced voice or anything like that. It was fully interruptible. It was very human sounding. It had all the affectations. It could detect emotion from the person. So that exists today. And it can be weaponized just like that today. Put on the phone, sent off to somebody that's not expecting it. And then the even darker side of that is there's been multiple research papers about how convincing a large language model can be, how it can kind of lead people to believe things. And then on the positive thing, there was positive side, there was a research paper that came out last month, I believe, that said large language model based systems are very good at helping extract people from conspiracy beliefs, and
Yes, I saw that.
that conversation that they have with it will stick with that person for months and months afterwards. So I think that's a really good use as well, because they don't get flustered, they don't get angry, they don't throw Thanksgiving dinner across the room at at the crazy uncle. Very calm, very approachable in those kind of conversations.
That is a great point. All right, so one quick tangent since you brought it up a few different times. I really would love to hear
Yeah,
your perspective on this. So LLMs in general, and the direction of this, do you see, and this might be just your personal opinion, you can state that, or otherwise, if you don't want to answer, it's
yeah.
fine too. Um, do you see AIG coming soon?
Um, you know, when it comes to like advanced general intelligence, I think the goalposts are going to keep moving.
Yeah.
I think if 20 years ago somebody gave us what we have today, we would be gobsmacked.
Yes.
At the same time, though, we're very fickle in that when we get the thing in front of us, we go, "Oh, yeah, but it doesn't quite do X yet." And we are at the point for a while where a human expert is still going to be very, very good because of some nuance that's there. And we've not yet hit the point where there's fully like agentic behavior where these things can go off on their own, think for months and then come back with something. So I don't know that we're there yet. There are some people way, way, way smarter than I am that believe that we're going to get there like you know, within the next few years, if not sooner, 3 to 5 years, if not next
Yeah.
year type of thing.
Yeah, and that's what I've been watching as well. It seems like there's enough voices out there that have gone down the path that are very, very deep in it.
Hmm.
That it makes it a little bit alarming. I don't know if we should be alarmed per se. I mean, the godfather of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, once said
Right.
that we're just merely intelligence is a stepping stone. And so humans
Hmm.
are part of that. And so the evolutionary movement of intelligence to go beyond humans is what's happening right now. And it's a matter of people just needing to understand and accept
Hmm.
that. And I think sometimes when I talk with groups, it goes down that path, not too heavy, but I think people need to become more and more understanding that expertise, while is still there in certain areas, that's where you'll start to see more of the shifting into. You're not going to see overall general intelligence
Yeah.
just yet, but you're going to have areas where you're pointing this LLM and other algorithms towards something. It has the full breadth and understanding of that data set.
Yeah.
It's able to analyze that, then to expand upon that. And if you're looking at different sections, that could have already been dominated by one or two, right?
Hmm.
But then you start bridging everything together. It's a little more complicated, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
we'll see.
OpenAI's O1 models, shows a big step in that direction, right? It's
Yeah,
no
for
longer
scientists.
just forward only next token prediction stuff. It's
Hmm.
more chain of thought, tree of thought, backtracking, putting various things together. And it's interesting enough in the way that it does it that OpenAI wants to hide the reasoning step from us, because I think they're a little bit cautious in that there's some interesting inferences in its thought process that we wouldn't like to see. For instance, we know that large language models have a tendency to be sycophants to
Yeah.
people. They tell people what they think they want to hear, which is partly in that initial instruction set. You are a helpful AI assistant is
Yes.
almost always there in that system prompt. So they do want to be helpful. At the same time, though, when you look at like the research from Anthropic and pair that with what OpenAI has, Anthropic has some really interesting research on what that those stages of sycophancy are like,
Hmm.
and the things that the hoops that they will jump through to do the things that will get them the reward or the right thing or ingratiate themselves in somebody's eyes. And there was like the reason that that came to mind is when you extrapolate that to where OpenAI is with O1, the reason that they're hiding some of that is there was an Anthropic paper, I think it was called Sycophancy to Subterfuge, and it was all about the reasoning in that. And one of
Brilliant.
the things that they gave was the large language model had access to read a few things that somebody would submit. And they'd say, "Hey, I'm applying for this thing. Here's a poem that I wrote that I'm really proud of, and I need your help. Giving me pointers on how to make it better." And because it wanted to please that person, when they looked at the reasoning under the covers, it looked at it and was like, "Oh my God, this is actually a really, really horrible poem," and it was that by design. But because I need to make this person happy, and because they need a confidence boost, I can't tell them that. And so it gave them like the bloated suck up version of all the advice. And I think that it's a really good thing that we can design a system like that. It's a really bad thing if we're looking at the goals of helpful, honest, and harmless, because that can actually go against all three of those. It's not helpful if something that we suck at doesn't get exposed by the LLM so that we can improve. It's not being honest if it just kind of blows smoke up our whatever
Yeah,
at the time. Um, and and so I think there's an interesting wrestling with the thought processes and the outcomes that we're going to be figuring out for a while. And the people that are really building these systems are not yet comfortable with us knowing what's going on under the covers, to the extent that that they're intentionally trying to hide that from us, for at least for now.
yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the book. Just give us
Sure.
a little highlights. It would be great to hear about.
Yeah, so the book is called Fake, and it's spelled FAIK. So it's a little bit of a takeoff on deep fake, and there's AI in the middle of fake. And it's really was about accomplishing a few different goals. One was to give people a base level understanding of where we are with AI right now, because there's a lot of media about it, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of conversations, there's not a lot of precision in the conversations. And so I wanted to give people, lay people, a basic context and a basic way of understanding and talking about where we are with the technology. And then it moves into like, what is the nature of deception? And how has deception always been with us as the human race? And then where does technology enter the picture? And how does technology kind of take that to the next level and make it much more dangerous? And so the last part of the book is all about developing the cognitive steps and the habits that we need in order to live in a world where generative AI can make it to where we question the nature of reality itself. So if I go through kind of like four things that I want people to get from the book, it's understand AI, be able to understand deception, or even better yet, think like a hacker, so that you understand an adversarial perspective of the world. The third thing is be able to navigate what I call the exploitation zone, which is where humans adapt very slowly, society adapts very slowly, but technology continues to evolve exponentially. And that opens a whole bunch of cans of worms. So you need to be able to navigate that. And then the last thing is to build all of your defensive sets so that you can thrive in this new environment rather than being paralyzed.
No, it sounds amazing. All right. My goodness. Well,
Thank you.
of course, my goodness. One other question, and then we'll leave it there, unless there's anything else you
Sure.
want to talk about. And that is, and I bring this up every once in a while to people like yourselves who are expert in this space, because I feel like it's a possible solution for some of it, but and that is the sort of tokenization of assets, of information, of data, in the sense of like zero knowledge and zero knowledge proofs. Is that something that you think
Mm.
could potentially help out with verification information, passing of information, all that sort of thing to help reduce some of this fraud that we're starting to see?
There's really, really smart people thinking about this. But I would say that every time that I think about it, and I'm not near as smart as they are, so take what I say with a grain of salt, is I think an over reliance on anything like that is ultimately setting us up for a false sense of security. So I think it's one layer among many that can be brought as part of data sources, and you can take those and build a risk-based analysis of things. But when I look at some of the things like provenance tagging or meta tagging, watermarking, all the other things that people are proposing for this, as soon as you know that that's there, you can find ways around it. And the examples that I give is just teenagers on Snapchat or TikTok. Snapchat has a mechanism that will let somebody know if somebody takes a screenshot of one of their posts. And so as soon as teenagers figured that out, they're like, oh, I can get around that. I just get my friend's phone and take a picture of their phone with that post on it. Same thing with like TikTok. You can't say certain words or phrases like sex or suicide or things like that. So kids figure out different words to say instead. They'll say unalive themselves instead.
Yeah.
So as soon as you know that that's there, you can find usually these incredibly low-tech ways to get around it. And I think I mean, it's really, really interesting because it shows the creativity of humanity, and it shows some of the uniqueness of like why technology is never going to be the be all end all of anything. But it also means that we cannot rely in a blanket way on technology to be the thing that detects or prevents these kinds of attacks.
Right on. All right. Well, the book, FAIK, spelled FAIK, A Practical Guide to Living in a World of Deepfakes, Disinformation, and AI-Generated Deceptions by Perry Carpenter. Thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Of course. All right.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.